Hello and welcome to Sundays with Survivors featuring Ted Comet. Thank you to those who are joining us today and to those viewing this recording. It's so wonderful to see so many new and familiar faces. As always, I got to give a loving shout out to my amazing parents and a very special thank you to all of the survivors and their family members who have shared their testimonies with us, especially today's guest, Ted Comet. My name is Michael Mantel. I'm a psychotherapist, educator, and 3G, the grandchild of Holocaust survivors Alice Diamond from Satamar, Romania, and Mickey Mendelovic from Siget, Romania. In their memories and to combat Jew hatred and Holocaust denial and distortions, I began producing and hosting these programs. In October 2020, with the help of Andrea Bolender, I launched the Sundays with Survivors program, the first which featured Holocaust survivor Irving Roth of blessed memory. Thank God we had such success with that program that I added more Holocaust education programs, including Mondays Among the Nations, 2G Tuesdays, and 3G Thursdays, featuring non-Jewish allies and children and grandchildren of survivors, and added more programs that cultivate Jewish pride and allyship and combat Jew hatred on and off college campuses. I am so grateful and proud to say that we are going 4 years strong and counting. Today's program is a very unique Sundays with Survivors, and it features centenarian Ted Comet, who will be sharing his wife Shoshana Comet's Holocaust testimony through a visual tour of 5 larger-than-life tapestries created in the 1960s by Ted's wife, Shoshana. Through the lens of these unique works of art and Shoshana's story, Ted explores the themes of Holocaust history, trauma, psychological repair, and an affirmation of life. Today's program is presented in partnership with 9 incredible groups and organizations, including the Rededication Project, CUNY Alliance for Inclusion, also known as CAFI, Alums for Campus Fairness, Students Supporting Israel, VUJU Amsterdam, StandWithUs, the May Ever Youth Movement of Moise Safra Center and Prat Leadership Academies in Israel, and 3GNY. Throughout Ted's presentation, we invite you to write your comments or questions in the chat, or raise your virtual hand to ask your question, or you can unmute yourself to speak if we don't see your raised hand. So, unlike most of our programs, we want this to be as interactive as possible throughout the program from the beginning. Feel free to ask your questions and share your comments at any time. And just 2 announcements before we begin. We have 2 wonderful programs in January that I hope you will save the date and join us for. On Monday, January 6th, via Zoom, please join us for our upcoming Mondays Among the Nations, featuring Sasha Wilson, an award-winning Bulgarian-American Lambda-trained actor, musician, and writer based in London. Sasha will present a talk on how nearly all of Bulgaria's almost 50,000 Jews were saved from deportation during World War II, and how the events that took place and her Bulgarian family inspired her to write the incredible play entitled The Brief Life and Mysterious Death of Boris III, King of Bulgaria, which she co-wrote and starred in at the 59 East 59th Street Theaters in New York City and won numerous awards for. I was lucky enough to see it when it was performing here, and it was absolutely amazing. And on Sunday, January 26th, for International Holocaust Remembrance Day, please join us for the next Sundays with Survivors, featuring Marion Blumenthal-Lazan. Marion is the author of 4 Perfect Pebbles, a Holocaust story, her unforgettable memoir recalling the devastating years that shaped her childhood during the Holocaust. Marion also has been featured on PBS and has a 2003 PBS documentary about her Holocaust testimony titled Marion's Triumph, which is narrated by Deborah Messing. As you can see, there's great programming ahead in the new year, and I hope you can join us for one or all of them. With that, I'd like to once again thank you all for being here and your continued support of these incredible programs. And again, thank you and welcome to the incredible Ted Comet. Ted, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michael. Bruchim Abayim, and welcome to all those who've joined us. It's a pleasure to be able to share this experience, which is very important what you're doing here, because there's so much forgetfulness that takes place, and we must retain, in a sense, the almost the presence of the loss, and this helps in to sustain that notion. In a sense, the more every time we talk about the Holocaust, etc., it's like we're bringing some of it back to life. So Yasher Koach to Michael and to all of you who join in this program. Now, in terms of what we're doing today, it's going to be a little bit different from what you get regularly. The story is about my wife, who as a survivor, originally from Belgium, and they made it through Belgium, through France, through Portugal, and eventually came to the United States. And then at the age of 42, my wife developed a passion for weaving. And this was at a time when artists did not do weaving. At the time, craftsmen did the weaving, artists did the design that craftsmen used. And in art, you have two kinds of art. There's the decorative art, but then there's the psychological art. That psychological art happens when people have something they need to express, they just can't find the words for it. And so art becomes the medium through which they're able to surface those things. And what I'm going to share with you tonight is the way my wife used art as a way of unshackling herself from her Holocaust trauma to such an extent that it freed her to become subsequently a psychotherapist specializing in treating Holocaust survivors. So let's go on, Michael, to the first shot. So at that time, artists did not directly do weaving. And as I said before, artists did the designing. So because there wasn't a place for my wife to learn how to, we brought a loom, we brought it into the house, and she's basically taught herself how to weave. So here's the thing: when we first came in into our apartment for her weaving, you could see she's very happy there. You also see she obviously has a flair for color. And we're going to see how all of this eventuated in the tapestries. So now let's go to the first tapestry. So it's called In the Beginning. If you begin to see at the top, it's quite irregular. Why? Because she's learning the craft, how to weave. As she gets a little bit lower, you could see that there's the openings here. And those openings represent allowing emotions to get expressed. And there's always a tension there between the need to open up, in other words, to heal. At the same time, you open up too quickly, it can get threatening. So look what happens. You have open and shut, open and shut, open and shut. As she gets more comfortable, notice the openings become more pronounced and more sustained. As she gets more comfortable, everything gets more regulated. And at the bottom, it's almost like a womb where she's ready to give birth to her art. And so what you have in that very first piece, which, by the way, was not pre-designed, which she designed while working on the loom itself. All the next tapestries you're going to see were all pre-designed. But this is one piece, like a piece of jazz, as I said, was composed on the loom itself.
Ted, I do want to say that I had the privilege of coming to your home and seeing these well, I didn't see them at your home. You had the pictures of them because they were actually on loan at the Center for Jewish History. So I came to your home with a bunch of high school students, and you shared all about your wife and the tapestries and even your experiences during World War II. And then I went to the Center for Jewish History and I see them in person and they're stunning. So there's a lot of questions that people can ask. I just want to share one that one of the students asked during our tour at your home was noticing that there are these woven open spaces and closed spaces. And one of the students wanted to know, was this intentional? Meaning, was she just learning? You said this was her first woven piece. Was she just learning how to weave and that's why there were some of these openings? Or was it representative of her psychological or inner feelings?
The answer was both. When you say intentionally, if you understand the kind of art we're talking about cannot be put into words, because if she had the words for it, she wouldn't have to do the weaving. It took 1.5 years for her to weave the 5 6-foot-high tapestries. So the point is that these are something she couldn't find the words for, and so she turned to art to do that. You can't hardly see this, but that tapestry is 6 foot high. So it was I was stunned that she was able to produce something this subtle and sophisticated without training, just by her own intuitive abilities. So now we move to the next tapestry. So just the idea is to show that the tapestries now hang back. They were at a museum, as Michael said before. They're now back in my home. I just wanted to show you how they were, part of our of the inner decor or component in our apartment. Go to the next slide. And this is the second tapestry. It's hard to imagine. This tapestry is actually 6 foot high and 4 feet wide, and a triptych. And I was stunned that someone who had never touched a loom before could have produced something that's so technically astute here. Now, so how does this tapestry fit into the whole pattern, whose goal was subconsciously to unshackle herself from her Holocaust trauma? So look at the title. It's called An Ideal World. What I usually ask when I got a group, how does this differ from the first tapestry? There are a lot of differences. Anyone want to comment on? They see the differences between the second tapestry and the first tapestry?
This one, I mean, it's exactly, I really see the title, An Ideal World. Like, this to me is something that you would have like hanging as a centerpiece. It looks so like almost perfect, and just how, forget the word, but it's like, the right is the same as the left. And it's very beautiful. It's very striking. And the other one, you could, like, if you didn't know, you'd almost think it was like old, that it wasn't done on purpose, the way you said it was. So that's the differences that I'm seeing. It's very beautiful.
I also want to say I see David with you more. Wonderful. Hi, David.
Hi, Michael.
As you notice, this is called An Ideal World. In other words, this is a world where everything is in perfect place. Look at the balance, the 2 side pieces, the centerpiece. But what you don't have here that you had in the first one were those openings. So you begin to see that on the technical level, this was a major advance in the process and the skill of weaving. What you don't have here is the emotional openness that you had in the first one. So what does this see? This represents a world that she wished existed, a world that's controllable rather than the world that she actually experienced. But there's one point here that I found very profound. Look at these two round objects. The colors are the opposite. What's her statement here is that even in an ideal world, nothing is ever totally ideal.
Ted, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
And actually, let me just share that Sherry said that she noticed that it looks balanced with equilibrium and also has openings at the lower part. So she's noticing these fringes on the lower part. And someone said that they noticed that it's symmetrical as opposed to the other piece. I wanted to ask you, because I forgot, these pieces are named. Were they named before or while it was happening, or only after all 5 were complete?
I would say all 5, yeah.
Okay.
And after there was where I saw a pattern in these things. So it's true. These are openings, but not openings in the same way that the first one was. The openings are almost separate. So I had an artist visiting it, and he looked at that centerpiece. Pause. One of the drawbacks of just seeing a photograph rather than the actual pieces, the photograph is 2-dimensional. So it doesn't capture adequately the 3-dimensional nature of a tapestry. These artists look at that centerpiece, and he said, you know, it's so tightly woven, it looks like it's about to explode. And that was a very prescient observation, because the explosion takes place in the very next tapestry. So now we're going to move from an ideal world to a world of destruction. And here is Shoah, a dialogue with God. So the flames, instead of literally rising from the ground, descend Mishamayim from the heavens into 6 points representing the 6 million. And here, it's hard to make out at first, but follow this. That green form is the profile of a woman seated, bent over in mourning. Follow this. That's the curve of her back, her hair, her arm, her bosom, her belly, her thigh. And between the woman and the flames of this arm with the fillet on it, trying to protect her. And on the other hand, you have an Auschwitz numbered wrist and the hand in a position that asks the question, how could this be? How could this have happened? Where was God? And then she wanted to put God into the tapestry. Technically, surprisingly, it was very easy. Just using the 2 Hebrew letters Yud Yud that stand for God. So it wasn't a technical issue. The problem was theological. You put God on top, on the bottom, on the middle. And then she said to me, this is something that I can't resolve, that everybody's going to have to struggle with. Where was God when the disaster strikes? But so she left God out of this thing. So, but what should he do? It exists today, but at that time, to my knowledge, I had not seen any tapestry that had these openings, open airs. So what she did was all these openings here. Before that, the tapestries that I was familiar with were like carpets, no openings. But here, these for her represent the moral void of a world that could permit the Holocaust to take place. And if you look here, the woman's womb is open, meaning not only that 6 million died, but all the children and all the generations that will forever remain unborn. And this was the breakthrough piece. So she was able to emotionally try to come to grips with the intensity of the Shoah.
Two questions come up, one from Rosa and one from Sandy. They're both very similar. Rosa or Sandy, do you want to ask them yourself, or would you like me to?
Sure, I can ask. Ted, can you tell us for this particular tapestry or any of them, or if there's a similar answer, how long did it take Shoshana to complete and be satisfied that she had a finished tapestry?
The 5 tapestries took about 1.5 years, but she wasn't working on them, like 9 to 5. She still had a family and a home, but it was 1.5 years to complete the series. Remember, this is 6 foot a high piece, so they're very ambitious. And later on, I'll explain to you a little bit more as we needed to clean and restore the tapestries, the technical side of it. But meanwhile, in terms of the message of it, this is her confrontation with the enormity of the disaster.
And Rosa asks a question similar to that, but then she also asked like how long it took for each tapestry to be completed. But then she says, did she ever go back and add to them after one was finished and moving on to the next? And were they done in a linear pattern or manner?
It's not like some painter finished a painting and then came back and repainted parts. That's not what happened here. She completed each piece and then moved on to the next step. The next tapestry, which we're going to go to now, I just want to show, here's a group of students, most of this is done in our apartment, and we'll move to the next slide. And this enabled her to move from the macro to the micro and to be more personal. So look at this war. That arrow represents an airplane dropping bombs on a field of luscious flowers. Heads are bent in sadness, and at the base lies this dead child with a primordial head, a broken right arm. But look, there's a flower growing out of its left wrist, meaning that even in the worst possible moments, there's still that aspiration of life. When she took this tapestry off the loom and hung it on the wall the way you see it now, she recalled that they were on a train running across France when the German airplanes came in and bombed them. And they shouted, "Jump for your lives." So this teenager jumped off the train, landed in the field, and then the airplanes returned and bombed the passengers. And there was no protection, no tree, not even a bush or brush. It was open, just grass and flowers. And her father said, "There's no way we can survive this. Let us lie down in the grass. The flowers will be our tombstones. Let us hold hands and let us recite the Shema," which they did, and they were not hit. But when she realized that she was dealing now with a personal experience, and that was really her portrayed there, her right arm became paralyzed. And we went to doctors all over, and finally they said, it's not physiological, it's psychosomatic. So she went into psychoanalysis, and in the analysis, it surfaced that through her weaving, she was surfacing memories, and that these memories were proving so painful, she subconsciously tried to prevent herself from continuing by self-paralyzing her arm. But because the therapy was successful, the arm came back, and she was able, in a sense, to be able to sense this, in a sense, it was a piece that made it personal and allowed her to work through this trauma. And then after working through, there was one more tapestry, which will be the next one. The bottom is her initials here, and 69, the year when she made it, and S, her name was Shoshana. That stands for hers. So there's airplane, bomb, flowers, dead child.
So Ted, I have a comment to make as you're bringing this up. So the other ones thus far had been more abstract of her kind of experience and emotional state of being in the Holocaust. This depicts an actual event that occurred.
Yes, and the point was, in order to allow herself emotionally to deal with this individual private experience, she needed the previous one to be able to, in a sense, get her hands around the larger phenomenon. Look, there's a lot of Holocaust art, and I'm not saying this is unprecedented, but I don't know of any series where you could actually see how each tapestry advanced the process of unshackling herself from her trauma. And it required all the things that before. The opening one, which is technical, the second one, which is ideal, like the image of an ideal world, and then became the Holocaust in its larger totality, and then individually hitting on this last piece.
I find it amazing that she didn't have any experience with weaving prior to this, but it was the mode or medium that she picked up to tell her Holocaust experience and testimony.
But it's interesting you raise that, because I asked her, why did you choose weaving over painting? It's so much more complex. And she knocked me out with her answer. She said, because paint, which derives from chemicals, is inert. And a painting, when completed, is fixed in time. Whereas with wool, there's constant movement and change in a past tapestry as there is with life itself. Wow, that was a whammy of a response. And because it was very difficult, we traveled a lot. She was always looking, because the wool, she only take wool which was vegetable dyed. And to him, she tried to take what was not seeming alive and to give it life. Yeah. I mean, if you ask me how this came about, to me, it's all a wonder and a miracle. Here, just you see the three of them together. So now, this is how they hang in the tapestry in our apartment. And now we're going to deal with the last tapestry. And this last tapestry was woven on the occasion of our son's bar mitzvah, and was the only tapestry was related to a specific occasion. And what is this tapestry all about? What message is a surviving mother conveying to her son? So if you look at his, on top you have the 2 tablets representing the 10 commandments. But when you see tapestries, the commandments, it usually has smooth shaped sides. But look at this, these are jagged edged. What are those jagged edges there? Those represent this notion that life is filled with jagged edged. Life is filled with tragedy. Life is filled with challenges. Life is not simple. And the letters are not contemporary script, but they add up to the priestly benediction that the priest during the time of the temple used to invoke, saying, Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, may the Lord bless you and protect you. And what happens to this blessing? It cascades over our sun, who is represented by that thick purple yarmulke, the double profile of his face, meaning he bows his head as he receives the blessing, and he's covered by a talit shaped like wings to bear him up to Sinai. And her message was, you stood at Sinai. And because Sinai took place in a desert, and the desert is a metaphor for a hostile, non-nurturing world, our tradition demands that no matter how rough the going, we always have to affirm life. And with that, she closed the loom and never touched it the rest of her life. But doing this series, so successfully unshackled herself from her trauma that it elicited a rush of such energy that she went back and became a psychoanalyst and ended up dealing with the Holocaust by helping and treating survivors. So that was that was her journey. What you see here is how they looked. They did a beautiful job at the Museum of Leukemia. You don't see it here, but on this is my late father-in-law's talit. One of the few things that that they were able to survive. They lived in Antwerp, Belgium, and the morning that the Nazis came in, her father came in. He was a diamond dealer, went to his own vault and took the diamonds, and they fled. And for the next 2 years, they were in flight through Belgium and through France. So so this is how the whole thing looked. And what we're going to move at this point is her journey through the process of how she used art to unshackle herself. And now we're going to move to the next phase. What are the lessons that we can learn from her in her second career as a psychotherapist? So, and now we're going to hear from a talk that she gave in 1988 in Jerusalem at a conference. Now, my wife had a skill I've never seen anybody else possess, which is she could tell somebody off and they walked away smiling. How she did that, she never taught me how to do it. Why I bring it up is because she's basically castigating her audience. Why? For referring to survivors as victims. Her thesis being they were once victims. But those who were able not just to survive, but to create new lives for themselves were moral and spiritual victors. And by referring to them as victims, you're pushing them into their negated past rather than, in a sense, what they were able to achieve in their next lives. And that makes them moral victors. So now we're going to hear my wife's statement about survivors being heroic.
Can you see me? The title of my paper is The Stigmatization of Unsung Heroes. It was difficult for me to prepare it, for it evoked painful memories of my own experiences, as well as those of the survivors and their children who had passed through my office, carrying the burden of their legacy. What is this legacy, and how can it be passed on to future generations in a constructive and meaningful way? My major point is that we have to change this legacy from the stigma of victim to that of a moral and spiritual victor. As I scanned the psychoanalytic literature on survivors and their children, I found that much of the research was based on a diagnostic assessment called the survivor's syndrome. This categorization, which was established as a base for the German reparations in the 50s and the 60s, relied heavily on pathology and has created a stigmatized image which needs to be redressed. The time has come to redress the situation. Out of empathy with their pain, we have focused on the suffering of survivors. But in that process, we have lost sight of their moral and spiritual resistance that enabled them to survive, to form new relationships, to marry, to bring children into this world, and make important contributions to Israel and Jewish communities around the globe. I am calling for the integration of the spiritual resistance with the trauma, which hopefully could remove the stigma and change the survivor's legacy from being a burden to one that not only their children can be proud of, but can serve as a source of inspiration for future generations. For in the deepest sense, the survivors have affirmed the eternity of the Jewish people that truly Am Yisrael Chai.
My wife's thesis was this. As I mentioned before, that trauma is built into the human condition. And the biggest challenge that every person faces is how they handle their trauma. Do you let the trauma master you, or do you master the trauma? And even when the trauma is recognized, the advice usually given is put it behind you and move on. Her thesis was there's something profounder to do, and that is use the trauma and transmute the trauma into creative energy and action. She went so far as to tell me that all great art comes out of trauma. I was so stunned by that notion. I began looking up the backgrounds of great artists, and I found they all came out of miserable childhoods. And they were able to take, in a sense, that trauma and to create something out of it. So this notion of the use of trauma, and what I've got groups, especially younger ones, I try to explain to them that we all have more resilience within us than we're able to recognize. And we have the capacity, in a sense, to not move beyond, but to use whatever our trauma. She said, for example, the best way of self-healing is to use your trauma to heal somebody else. So this idea, of the transmutation of trauma. I was asked by an 8th grader of one earlier presentation, what meaning do these tapestries have to you personally? And I said, nobody had asked me that before, but as I gave it thought, I said, they're a perfect illustration of Shoshana's thoughts about the transmutation of trauma. When she died, I took the trauma of her death, which took place 12 years ago, and I transmuted that trauma into presenting these tours of her art. So this art is, for me, the healing component for that loss. And besides that, I also recognize something else. And that gives me a greater sense of urgency. And that is that young people today are not sufficiently exposed to role models that are inspirational. And this is. And therefore, I try to find as many avenues as possible for people to be exposed to and to try to absorb this message. Like I got a message from a 16-year-old girl writes me, seeing how Shoshana transmuted her trauma, first becoming an artist and then a therapist, is such a powerful role model. It is helping me deal with my own personal traumas. I mean, when you get stuff like that, it's very emotionally very moving. And it's like a miracle to me. Here she's dead 12 years, and her message is still resonating today with people. So all that's a big miracle, and it gives me meaning, and to me, it keeps her alive. So she had tragically Alzheimer's for the last 15 years of her life. But because of this, my image of her is what we've just seen on her, which she's 65 there, but it captures her at her peak, her look, her what was important to her, and her ability to, articulate her point, which was that we all have trauma, but we all can master that trauma. Beyond that, use the trauma and become creative ourselves. Also, I was at a seminar on the use of art as a therapeutic tool, and they talked about when a person suffers trauma, before they can do something, they have to process it. And that act of processing can vary from person to person. And that insight was important to me because it answered a question which I said, why did she wait till the age of 42 to do these tapestries? And then it took her all those years to process the trauma. So it gave me a deeper, an understanding that I hadn't had before. So again, my own work and my own career, which was involved in rescue, relief, rehabilitation of Jewish communities. She was my partner and supporter in all those activities as well. So it was a good match. So yeah, we reinforced each other, and yeah, it was a good news.
I just wanted to say something, pointed out that I just think it's so amazing that you said that, unless I heard you wrong, but that the affirmation of life tapestry was her last one. And I just find it so amazing because the tapestries were really about being in the past, and how that last one, she decided she's stepping into the present, to really help people. And you could tell, first of all, just how proud you are of her, which is so moving, from the beginning. But she obviously clearly lived exactly how she felt, like she was like true to herself. So I just wanted to point that out, and thank you so much for sharing this with us. Really beautiful.
Thank you, Maura. Yeah, very perceptive comments. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation. I was looking so forward to it, and everything you've shared verbally and the photos of the tapestries and the talk is just magnificent. I'd like to, though, also, Ted, ask you something about yourself, a question I've had in my mind since I saw you at the Salute to Israel, the Celebrate Israel Day Parade. I've had this question waiting, I guess, for this moment to ask you this question. Can you tell us some background of yourself and how you came to think of and go forward with the Celebrate Israel Day Parade for all these years that has been a magnificent piece of New York and Israel's history? And in that description, can you tell us about yourself as a little boy and knowledge of Israel, and when it all came together to be something that you saw could become the parade. Thank you.
Well, I founded the parade in 1964. Let's step back again. After the Holocaust, France, for the one and only time, took in 600 child survivors of Auschwitz. What happened to the 600? They gave them into the responsibility of a French Jewish organization whose initials are OSE, which stand for Œuvre de Secours des Enfants, the Children's Aid Society. And what did they do with it? They established orphan homes to help these kids, in a sense, mature in a healthier environment. And during the war, if a Jew wanted to join the French underground called the Maquis, he had two options. He could join the regular one or the Jewish section. The head of the Jewish section was called Robert Gamzon, and he was head of OSE, and he came to America, and he said, I'm trying to recruit volunteers to come in to serve as the big brothers and big sisters in these orphan homes to these orphans who had lost so much with their family. So heard his story, so I volunteered for a year, and it was a traumatic experience because I really did understand the destructiveness of the Holocaust on the one hand. On the other hand, I was impressed with the ability of the Joint Distribution Committee to assist the survivors. And I was also moved by the ability of these surviving children to respond to love and to care and to concern handling. And the insight I got was, it's possible to make a difference in people's lives. So so when I came back, that became my purpose. I got my advanced degree. And one other little story, when I left, before I left in 1946, a friend of mine said, I have a cousin living in Versailles, would you look him up? I said, I have no idea where I'm going to be assigned, but I put the name and address in my wallet and forgot about it until I came to France, and they sent me to the children's home where? In Versailles. So I came there late at night, just met the director. In the morning, I had breakfast. These were older boy teenagers. Across from me was this teenager, and between my broken French, Yiddish, Hebrew, we got a conversation going. I was very impressed with him. And then afterwards, I went for a walk, and then I remembered the cousin. So I pick up the piece of paper, and the address is 63 Avenue de Paris. I look up. To my surprise, the street I'm walking on is Avenue de Paris. I said, I can't believe the cousin lives in the same street. 63 turned out to be the address of the children's home. So I went in there, and I went up to the only person I knew besides the director, and I said to him, is there anybody here by the name of Elie Wiesel? And the kid looks up at me and he said, c'est moi, that's me. So that's how Elie Wiesel became a close friend all the years. But it was my experience there that with the destruction of the Holocaust, and so my career was trying to rebuild Jewish life. So in 1964, I was director of something called the American Zionist Youth Foundation, which at the time was the only sponsor of programs in Israel for students. Hard to believe today because every organization has their own. But at that time, this was the only body. And then, and every year we used to have in Central Park the celebration of Israel Independence Day until I said, wait a minute, we're just talking to ourselves. And it's hard to believe today Israel was totally, totally invisible in America. So I went to the Mayor Lindsay at the time, and I asked him for permission to use Fifth Avenue for a parade. And he said, you can't have it. I said, why not? He said, we have a lot of important people there on Fifth Avenue, and they find the parade disruptive. So I said, Mr. Mayor, I said, what do you think it'll look like tomorrow in the newspaper where it says you've allowed the Irish and you've allowed the Germans to use Fifth Avenue, but the Jews you could refute? So that gave me, right away, I got permission for Fifth Avenue. And then, so the first 2 years was a struggle. The big change came the third year. The parade was scheduled for Sunday before the outbreak of the Six-Day War. And we all thought that Israel might go under. And I changed it from a parade to a demonstration of solidarity. And we had 250,000 people who came and marched past the thing. So, and it's glad to see that the parade is still going full momentum today. So, and then, from there, I went to the Federation system and Director of International Affairs, Leadership Development, General Assembly, and then to the Joint Distribution Committee. As my title now is Honorary Associate Executive of the Joint Distribution Committee. And the Joint Distribution Committee is the 3 hours of rescue, relief, and rehabilitation. So that's been my career, and that's the origin of what gives me the sense of urgency. And it is, look, I just had my 100th birthday, so there's a lot of history, but I still feel the urgency of there's still a role to play. I don't know if Michael had a chance to send out. Michael, did you send out that little piece?
I didn't get it from you yet, but if you email it to me, I'll share it. If you email it to me, I'll share it with. I
thought I sent it. Okay.
Oh no, I didn't get it yet. But if you share it, I'll put that in the follow-up email as well.
Great.
Yeah.
So anybody else before we say goodbye?
Any other questions, comments, anything? I would love to hear from as many people as possible for this beautiful program. It looks like my mother, Laurel, has a comment. That's my mother and father, Eddie and Laurie.
Good night. I just want to thank you so much for your story about your wife and you. I learned a lot more, and I can even appreciate and understand art better. Now, when I will look at a piece of art, I will try to think about what is the underlying intent of this piece of art. You really opened up my eyes to so many things, and I appreciate it. You and your wife are just amazing, amazing people, and thank you. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you.
My voice, it was very emotional for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted.
Okay, you're very welcome. It's a nice closing comment. I want to say that when my wife finished the tapestries and became a psychotherapist, she was asked, why did you give up your art? And she says, I did not, because to be a good therapist is more an art than it is a science. I said, boy, touche on that way. Which means, there are a variety of ways of dealing with it. And she preferred, at the end, look, the art was purely personal, individual. But when she became a therapist, she was able to address, the issue in a larger sense by helping others. So she was dealing with her trauma by transmuting that trauma into her work as a therapist and helping people to deal with trauma to find meaning and to find purpose. When I'm asked, you're 100 years old, what insights they have, I said, well, everybody wants to live a long life, but nobody wants to get old. So how do you do that? And I said, the answer is you have to have meaning and purpose. And when you do that, you get the energy and the drive, because that gives you life. I've told my children that quality triumphs over quantity at any time. So it's the quality of a life, and that we all have the capacity to help improve lives of other people as well. And the Jewish mission is, why are we on this world? To see if we could make it a better place when we leave it than the way we found it. So thank you all for joining in this spiritual star, whatever you want to call it, journey. And really thank you, Michael, for all that you put into doing this. And Yashar Koach to all of you.